I used to think my life was pretty straightforward. I worked as an architect, the kind that actually gets their hands dirty, sketching designs by day and supervising builds by night. My wife, Sarah, was a journalist, sharp, ambitious, always chasing the next big story. We had been married for 12 years, a solid dozen, and our marriage was like most, comfortable, predictable, full of routines we had built over the years. We lived in a quaint house on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by tall pines that whispered in the wind. Sarah and I had met in college, and from the start it felt like we were destined to be together. Our friends envied what they saw as a perfect marriage. We laughed at their jokes about how we were couple goals, but beneath the surface, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Not that I noticed right away. No, I was too wrapped up in work and the day-to-day grind to see what was happening right in front of me. Sarah was always a bit of a flirt. I never minded much, just part of her charm, I told myself, and I trusted her, or maybe I just wanted to believe that I did. She had this smile, one of those smiles that made you forget what you were doing, that drew people in, made them feel special. I used to think it was a gift. Now, I think it might have been a curse, the first time I felt that gnawing sensation, the one that creeps into your gut and makes you feel uneasy for no reason, was about 6 months ago. She started working late a lot, saying her editor was pushing her hard on a new investigative piece. I tried to be supportive, cooked dinners, and waited up for her. But something felt off. She came home smelling of a different cologne, not the cheap kind from the office, something richer, muskier. "Who wears cologne in your newsroom?" I joked once, trying to sound casual. "Oh, the new guy, William," she replied, barely looking up from her phone. "He's from the London office here for a few months on some special assignment." I didn't think much of it then. Why would I? I trusted her. We had been through so much together, arguments, relocations, deaths in the family, job losses, but we always came out stronger on the other side. So, I let it go. But I started noticing other things, little things. The way she laughed too loudly at his jokes when he came over for dinner, how her smile lingered a bit longer than it should when she looked at him. And then there were the inside jokes, the stolen glances, and moments of silence that seemed to last too long. It was all so subtle, almost imperceptible, but I felt it. The shift, the change in the air, like the calm before a storm. I tried to ignore it, to brush it off as paranoia. After all, who was I to question her integrity based on a few fleeting moments? But those shadows of doubt lingered. It was like trying to ignore a loose thread on a well-worn sweater. Once you noticed it, it was impossible to stop pulling. William became a fixture in our lives. He was around more often than any of our other friends, popping in at odd hours, sometimes even when I wasn't home. Sarah would laugh it off, saying he was just lonely in a new city and needed company. But there was something about him that didn't sit right with me. He was too charming, too confident. The kind of guy who knows he's good-looking and enjoys the effect he has on people, especially women. "Relax, he's harmless," Sarah would say when I brought it up. Her voice would be light, dismissive, but there was always a hint of something else, something I couldn't quite place. Besides, it's nice having someone who can talk about more than just concrete and steel. Ouch. That one stung, but I didn't show it. I wasn't about to let her see me sweat over some pretty boy with a British accent and a penchant for overexpensive cologne. Work was my refuge. I threw myself into it even more, taking on extra projects, leaving earlier, coming home later. If she noticed, she didn't say anything. In fact, she seemed relieved. More time for her and William to work on their story, I guessed. I began to watch them more closely from the corner of my eye. The way his hand would graze hers when he thought I wasn't looking, or the way they seemed to communicate without speaking, sharing those brief, secret smiles. Once I saw him whisper something in her ear, and she giggled like a schoolgirl, her cheeks flushed. That giggle, It wasn't the one I was used to. It was new, different, like she was letting him into a part of her I'd never seen before. I decided to confront her one evening. She had been texting more than usual, her phone constantly buzzing with notifications. She kept it face down, like she didn't want me to see. "Who are you texting all the time?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Just William. He's been having trouble adjusting to the city," she replied quickly, too quickly, her eyes flicking away from mine. I nodded, pretending to accept it, but my gut twisted. My instincts screamed that something was wrong, but I pushed them down. I didn't want to be that guy, the jealous, paranoid husband. Yet, the more I tried to ignore it, the more it gnawed at me, like a rat chewing through drywall. Then came the nights when she said she was working late with William at the office. I would call her desk phone, and she wouldn't answer. I'd hear the familiar beep of her voicemail and her soft, professional tone. "This is Sarah. Please leave a message." But no callback. When she finally got home, she'd look flustered, her clothes slightly disheveled, her hair undone in a way that seemed almost deliberate. I found myself staying awake later, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathing, waiting for it to change, wondering if she was dreaming of him. I felt like a stranger in my own home, trapped in a prison of my own making, where every smile, every glance, every touch between them was another brick in the walls, closing in around me. One night, I decided to test her. I pretended to be sleepy, my head heavy against the cushions of the couch. William was over again, uninvited. But I said nothing. I watched them from beneath half-closed eyelids, their banter flowing effortlessly, the laughter too frequent. I waited, silently, for that moment when they would slip, when they'd forget I was there. And then, it happened. Sarah smiled at him, that new smile I hated, and said, "Why don't you stay the night? It's too late for you to head back across town." William hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for his eyes to flick over to me, to check if I'd heard, if I was really asleep. I stayed perfectly still, my breathing slow and even. Then he grinned and nodded. "Sure, why not? It's not like I've got anyone waiting up for me," he joked. Their laughter danced around the room, an electric buzz that set my nerves on edge. They thought I was asleep. They thought I hadn't noticed their jokes and glances. I kept my eyes shut, my pulse steady, and waited. I stayed motionless on the couch, eyes closed, breath even. Every nerve in my body was taut, coiled like a spring, but I fought to keep still. I listened, every sense sharpened by suspicion. I heard the soft padding of their footsteps, the whispered laughter, the creak of the wooden floorboards as they made their way down the hall. And then, the door to our bedroom clicked shut. I waited, counted the seconds. Each one dragged out, long and excruciating, my mind racing, imagining what was happening behind that door. My heart pounded so hard I was sure they could hear it, even through the thick wooden walls. I could feel my hands clenching, my nails digging into my palms, and I realized I was shaking. I stood up slowly, making my way down the hallway like a ghost. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the walls were closing in around me. I reached the door, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I could hear them, their voices soft but unmistakable. William's low, gravelly tone, and Sarah's lighter, almost breathless giggle. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. My stomach churned with a sickening dread. But I needed to know. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I turned the doorknob quietly, gently, careful not to make a sound. The door swung open just enough for me to peek through. My heart stopped. There they were, tangled together in our bed. Sarah's back was arched, her hands gripping his shoulders as his mouth moved along her neck, her shirt already discarded on the floor beside them. The sheet barely covered their bodies, a tangle of limbs and lust. I could hear their breathing, ragged and deep. I could see her face, Her eyes closed, lips parted, whispering his name in a way she hadn't whispered mine in years. My world cracked open, shattered like glass against concrete. I stood there, frozen in place, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were witnessing. Part of me wanted to charge in, to rip him away from her, to scream, to fight, to do something, anything, but I didn't. I couldn't move. I just stood there, watching them, my heart breaking with every second that passed. William's hand slid down her body, fingers tracing along her skin, and I heard her gasp, a sound that cut through me like a knife. My legs felt weak. My mouth went dry. I felt like I was outside my own body, watching from above as some poor bastard's life was destroyed in front of him. I wanted to wake up, to believe this was some nightmare I'd conjured up in a fevered sleep. But it was real. All of it was real. I let the door swing open wider, and they both froze. Sarah's eyes flew open, and she saw me standing there. For a split second, I saw panic flash across her face, a flicker of guilt, then something else. Defiance. "Are you enjoying the moment?" I asked, my voice low, steady. The words came out cold, emotionless, like they belonged to someone else. I felt strangely calm, detached, like I was watching myself, from a distance. Sarah pulled the sheet up to her chest, trying to cover herself, her face pale. William scrambled back, his hands up like he was caught in some bad sitcom, caught in a situation he didn't know how to handle. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I took a step into the room, my eyes never leaving theirs. "Remember this night," I said quietly, "because it will be your last." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them in stunned silence. I didn't slam the door. I didn't need to. I went straight to the garage, my hands trembling, my thoughts racing, everything blurring together. My mind was on autopilot. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed the gas can from the corner, the one I used to fuel the mower, and headed to my car. I drove in silence, my mind numb, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. William's cabin was only a few miles away, nestled deep in the woods, isolated, just how he liked it. I parked the car a short distance away and walked the rest of the way, my footsteps soundless on the soft, damp earth. The cabin stood there, dark and quiet, like a beast slumbering under the moonlit sky. I doused it with gasoline, every corner, every window, and every wall. The liquid soaked into the wood, the smell of fuel thick in the air. And then I lit the match. The flames caught quickly, a hungry roar that devoured the dry wood, climbing higher, reaching for the night sky. I watched as the cabin turned into a blazing inferno, the heat licking at my face, my skin tingling. I stood there for a moment longer, feeling the fire's heat on my skin, watching the life I once knew turn to ashes. And then I walked away, leaving them alone with the flames and the darkness. I drove home in a daze, the image of the flames seared into my mind. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my heart was racing, each beat like a hammer against my chest. The night air whipped through the open window, cold and biting, but I barely felt it. All I could think about was the look on Sarah's face, the way her eyes had widened when she saw me standing there in the doorway, catching them in our bed. Her bed. I parked the car in the driveway, my hand still tight around the steering wheel. For a few moments, I just sat there, staring blankly ahead, trying to process everything. It felt like hours, but maybe it was only minutes before I finally pushed open the door and stepped out, my legs feeling like lead. The house was dark and quiet when I walked in, except for the soft, distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I stood there in the entryway, letting the silence wash over me. Part of me expected to hear their voices again, the giggling, the whispers, but there was nothing, just the emptiness. I took a deep breath and walked toward the living room where I had left them. The door to the bedroom was still closed. For a moment, I thought about opening it, about confronting them again. But what was the point? I knew what I had done. I knew the lines I had crossed, the bridges I had burned. Instead, I walked past the bedroom and headed for the kitchen. I grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet, the one I'd been saving for a special occasion, and poured myself a glass. My hand trembled as I lifted it to my lips, the amber liquid burning down my throat, warming me from the inside out. I slumped into the chair at the kitchen table, staring at the glass in my hand. The alcohol did nothing to dull the raw, jagged pain inside me. It only sharpened it, bringing everything into harsh focus, the betrayal, the lies, the way they looked at each other, thinking I wouldn't notice. A million thoughts raced through my mind. What now? Was this really it? Was this how everything ended, in a blazing inferno of anger and destruction? I felt a flicker of something, maybe regret, maybe guilt, but I pushed it down, deep inside where it couldn't reach me. And then, I heard it, the creak of the floorboard in the hallway. I set my glass down slowly and turned my head. The door to the bedroom opened, and Sarah stepped out, wearing a robe, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked at me, and for a moment, we just stared at each other, the silence stretching out between us like a vast chasm. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, but I could hear the tremor in it, the fear. "What did you do, Adam?" I took another sip of whiskey, savoring the burn, before answering. "He's gone," I said, my voice calm, almost detached. "He won't be coming back." Her face crumpled, and she stumbled back against the wall, her hand flying to her mouth. "What do you mean, gone?" she asked, her voice breaking. "What did you do?" I leaned back in the chair, my eyes fixed on hers. "I did what I had to do," I replied simply. "What he deserved. What you both deserved." Tears streamed down her face and she shook her head, her chest heaving with sobs. You burned it down. Didn't you? You burned his cabin?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She already knew. Her eyes searched mine, desperately looking for something, maybe a hint of remorse, maybe some sign that I wasn't the monster she now saw me as. But there was nothing. Just the cold, hard truth. "I never wanted this, Adam," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted any of this." I felt a wave of anger surge through me, hot and blinding. "Didn't you?" I shot back, my voice rising. "You invited him into our home, into our bed. You let this happen, Sarah. You made your choice." She sank to the floor, her hands covering her face, her body racked with sobs. I watched her, my heart a twisted knot in my chest, and I felt a strange mixture of anger and sadness, love and hate, all tangled together in a mess I couldn't untangle. "I loved you," I said quietly, almost to myself. "I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me?" She looked up at me, her eyes pleading, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I stood up, pushing the chair back, the legs scraping against the floor with a harsh screech. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Sarah," I said coldly. "Sorry won't bring back what you've destroyed." I turned and walked away, leaving her crumpled on the floor, her sobs echoing through the house. I grabbed my keys, opened the front door, and stepped out into the cool night air. I needed to get out, to breathe, to clear my head. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove, the road stretching out before me like an endless dark ribbon. I drove until the house was far behind me, until the memories were left in the dust, at least for a little while. The miles blurred into a haze of dark asphalt and fleeting headlights. I had no destination in mind, only a need to escape the suffocating weight of the house, the scene I had left behind. Sarah's face, her tears, her whispered apologies, they haunted me like a specter, chasing me down every empty road. I wanted to shut it all out, to drown out the noise in my head, but there was no escaping it. I found myself driving past familiar places, our places. The diner where we'd had our first date, the park where we used to walk hand in hand on lazy Sunday afternoons. Every corner held a memory, every street echoed with laughter that now seemed so distant, so unreachable. I couldn't stand it. The past was everywhere, lurking around every turn, reminding me of what I had lost, of what she had taken from me. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, my knuckles white, the leather creaking under the pressure. I tried to breathe, to calm the storm inside me, but it was no use. The anger was still there, simmering just beneath the surface, waiting to explode. I pulled over to the side of the road, the tires crunching against the gravel. I needed to think. I needed to figure out what came next. I leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes, trying to find some semblance of peace in the chaos. But all I could see was the fire, the way it had consumed everything, leaving only ashes in its wake. I could feel my chest tighten, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I opened my eyes and stared out into the darkness, trying to steady myself. And then, for the first time since I had driven away, the realization began to sink in. What I had done, what I had really done. I had killed a man. Sure, he was sleeping with my wife, but I had taken it a step further, a step beyond the point of no return. I had set fire to his cabin, knowing full well he could be inside. Hell, I wanted him to be inside. I wanted to punish him, to make him pay for taking what was mine. But now, in the cold light of reason, I realized the gravity of my actions. My heart pounded in my chest, a deep, resonating thud that seemed to echo in the stillness of the night. I tried to justify it to myself. He deserved it, I thought. He deserved every bit of it. But the voice in the back of my mind, the one that had always been my conscience, whispered otherwise. I stared at my hands, the same hands that had struck the match and thrown it onto the gasoline-soaked wood. They were clean now, but I knew they would never really be clean again. I had crossed a line I never thought I would cross, and there was no going back. I leaned forward, gripping the steering wheel, my forehead resting against it. I felt the weight of what I had done pressing down on me, heavy and unforgiving. I had done something terrible, something irreversible, and I didn't know how to live with it. The sound of my phone ringing cut through the silence, startling me. I fumbled for it, my hands shaking, and saw Sarah's name flashing on the screen. For a moment, I hesitated. I didn't want to hear her voice, didn't want to face what I had done, but I couldn't ignore it forever. I answered, my voice rough and strained. "What do you want?" "Adam, where are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. I could hear the fear, the panic. "Please, just come home. We need to talk. We need to figure this out." I let out a bitter laugh, more like a bark. "Figure what out, Sarah? There's nothing to figure out. It's done. What's done is done." "No, no," she pleaded. "It doesn't have to be like this. Please, just come home. We can fix this." "Fix this?" I echoed, incredulous. "How do you propose we fix this, Sarah? Do you think we can just go back to the way things were, pretend like none of this happened?" "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." I felt a flicker of something. Pity, maybe? Or was it a lingering trace of love, buried under the rubble of betrayal and anger? I didn't know. I just felt tired, so damn tired. "I don't know if I can come back, Sarah. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way." There was silence on the other end, and I could hear her breath catch, a soft sob escaping her lips. "Please, just come back. We can figure it out together." I closed my eyes, my head pounding, my heart heavy. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to turn the car around, to go back and try to make sense of this mess. But another part of me knew that nothing would ever be the same again. "I need time," I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. "I need to think." I hung up before she could say anything else, tossing the phone onto the passenger seat. I sat there in the dark, the weight of everything pressing down on me, and I knew that whatever I decided, there would be no easy answers. There was only the guilt and the ghosts of what I had done, haunting me, chasing me down every dark road. I drove around for hours, the dark road stretching endlessly before me. I had no place to go, nowhere to be. I was running on fumes, emotionally and physically. My thoughts churned like a storm at sea, tossing me around, pulling me under, making it impossible to breathe. I kept seeing the fire, the way it had roared to life, hungry and unforgiving, and then William's face, his smug grin, and finally Sarah's pleading eyes. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what I needed. I just knew I couldn't go back, not yet. Maybe not ever. Eventually, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a cheap motel just off the highway. The neon sign flickered in the darkness, casting an eerie glow over the cracked pavement. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, the quiet enveloping me like a shroud. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was past 3 in the morning. I felt hollow, like there was a void where my heart should be. I got out of the car and walked to the reception. The guy behind the counter barely looked up from his magazine, his eyes heavy-lidded, his face blank. I asked for a room, paid in cash, and took the key without another word. The room was small and smelled faintly of mildew, the wallpaper peeling in the corners, but I didn't care. I just needed to be away, somewhere I could be alone with my thoughts. I dropped my bag on the floor and collapsed onto the bed, staring up at the stained ceiling, my mind racing. I thought about Sarah, about how we met all those years ago in that coffee shop near campus. She was there with her friends, laughing, and I remember thinking that I had never seen anyone so alive. I had worked up the nerve to go talk to her, and somehow, against all odds, she had agreed to go out with me. We were inseparable after that. It seemed so simple then. Life, love, everything. But now, everything was so damn complicated. I thought about the look on her face when I left the house, the way her voice had trembled on the phone. She was scared, terrified even, and she should be. But part of me still loved her. How could I love her after what she'd done? After what I'd done? I rubbed my hands over my face, trying to clear my head. I reached for the remote and turned on the TV, hoping to drown out the thoughts that were swirling around in my mind. The local news channel flickered to life, and I froze. The words, "Breaking News," flashed across the screen, and the image of a fire lit up the night. I saw the charred remains of a cabin, still smoldering, the orange glow of the embers casting eerie shadows in the background. The reporter was speaking, her tone urgent. "And local authorities are investigating a fire that broke out earlier tonight at a remote cabin. The fire department was called to the scene, but by the time they arrived, the structure was fully engulfed in flames. One body was recovered from the scene, and the cause of the fire is still under investigation. The identity of the victim has not yet been released." My heart stopped. One body. The remote slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. The words echoed in my mind, a relentless drumbeat. One body. I felt the room spin, my breath catching in my throat. My hands trembled, and I grabbed the edge of the bed to steady myself. I had hoped, no, I had convinced myself, that maybe he wasn't there. That maybe he had left before the fire consumed everything. But I knew now, with a sickening certainty, that he hadn't. William was dead. I had killed him. A cold sweat broke out across my skin, and I felt the bile rise in my throat. I stumbled to the bathroom, barely making it to the toilet before I was sick, retching until there was nothing left inside me. I sank to the floor, my back against the cold tiles, my head resting against the wall. I closed my eyes, willing myself to wake up from this nightmare. But I knew there was no waking up. This was real. I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing in, suffocating me. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and frantic in my ears, like the ticking of a clock running out of time. I had to do something. I had to make a decision. I couldn't just sit here waiting for the world to crash down on me. I pushed myself up, my legs shaky, and splashed cold water on my face, trying to clear my head. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, my face pale, my eyes hollow, a stranger looking back at me. I needed to think. I needed to figure out my next move. I couldn't stay here. The police would be looking for me soon enough. Someone must have seen my car, or maybe Sarah had already told them what happened. I had no idea how much time I had, but I knew it wasn't much. I grabbed my bag and threw in a few essentials, my mind racing. I needed to disappear, at least for a while. I couldn't face the consequences, not yet. I needed time to figure things out, to come up with a plan. I shoved the last of my things into the bag and headed for the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I stepped out into the cold night air, my breath visible in the dim glow of the streetlights. I felt a chill run down my spine, a whisper of the fear that gripped me, and I knew that no matter where I went, I couldn't outrun what I had done. I got into the car, turned the key in the ignition, and drove off into the darkness, leaving behind the only life I had ever known. The days that followed were a blur of highways and back roads, cheap motels and truck stop diners. I kept driving, pushing further away from the city, from everything familiar. I was a man on the run, with no plan, no destination, just a need to keep moving. Each mile put more distance between me and the inferno I had left behind. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't escape the thoughts that chased me like a pack of wolves, their teeth bared, ready to tear me apart. I slept only when I had to, catching a few hours of restless sleep in the back seat of the car or in dingy motel rooms that all smelled of stale smoke and despair. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw William's face, first in our bed with Sarah, then consumed by flames, his features twisted in agony. The guilt was like a weight on my chest, pressing down harder with every breath. On the fourth day, somewhere in a nameless town that looked like every other nameless town I'd passed, I stopped at a gas station. I filled up the tank, my eyes constantly darting around, looking for any sign that someone might be watching me. I had become paranoid, always checking over my shoulder, waiting for the moment when it would all come crashing down. I went inside to pay, grabbing a coffee from the counter. The clerk, a kid no older than 20, gave me a polite smile as he handed me the change, but I could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes, the way he looked at me like he was trying to place my face. I hurried back to the car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I turned on the radio, needing to hear something other than the noise in my head. I twisted the dial, skipping over static and country music, until I heard a familiar voice, Sarah's voice. Still no official statement from the police, but sources close to the investigation have confirmed that the fire at William Fletcher's cabin is being treated as arson. Authorities are looking for a man named Adam Mercer in connection with the incident. Mercer, a local architect, is considered a person of interest and is believed to be on the run. Anyone with information on his whereabouts is urged to contact the police. My blood ran cold. They were looking for me. They knew my name, my face. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, a tightness that made it hard to breathe. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, cursing under my breath. I had been so stupid to think I could just disappear that no one would notice. I had to get rid of the car. It was too recognizable, too easy to track. I needed to keep moving, but first, I needed a new set of wheels. I drove a few miles down the road, my mind racing, and pulled into the parking lot of a roadside bar. The place was dimly lit, with a scattering of beat-up pickup trucks and motorcycles outside. It was the kind of place where people didn't ask too many questions. I went inside, the smell of sweat and spilled beer hitting me like a wave. I scanned the room, looking for an opportunity. There was a guy at the end of the bar, nursing a drink, his jacket slung over the back of his chair. He looked like he had been there a while, maybe drowning some sorrows of his own. I approached him, keeping my voice low and casual. "Hey man, you looking to make a quick $100?" He glanced up at me, his eyes bloodshot, his expression suspicious. "What's it to you?" "I need your truck," I said, sliding a crumpled $100 bill across the bar. "Just for a few hours. I'll bring it back. No questions asked." He eyed me for a long moment, then shrugged. "Fine, whatever. Keys are in it. Don't scratch it up." I nodded, taking the keys and slipping out the door before he could change his mind. I climbed into the truck, a beat-up old Chevy that smelled like smoke and grease, and started the engine. I pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward the nearest highway, putting more miles between me and my past. I knew this was only a temporary fix, a way to buy myself a little more time, but time was running out. I couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, they'd catch up to me. And when they did, I had no idea what I'd do. I thought about calling Sarah, but what would I say? Did she already know? Was she the one who tipped them off? Or was she as much in the dark as I was? I shook the thought away. I couldn't trust her. Not after what had happened. Not after what she'd done. I kept driving, my eyes scanning the rearview mirror, watching for any sign of flashing lights, for any hint that they were closing in. The night was dark, the road stretching out before me like a black river, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I was running out of options, out of places to hide. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. The roads seemed endless, a web of cracked asphalt leading nowhere and everywhere. Every town looked the same, a blur of broken neon signs and boarded-up shops. I had no idea how far I'd driven, only that I couldn't stop. Not yet. I had to keep moving, keep one step ahead. My hands clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles were white, my eyes flicking constantly to the rearview mirror, watching for any sign of pursuit. The truck rumbled along, its old engine sputtering now and then, and I knew it wouldn't last much longer. I needed to find somewhere to lay low, to think. I took the next exit off the highway, following a narrow road that wound through a dense forest. The trees closed in around me like dark, towering sentinels, the headlights barely cutting through the thick shadows. After a few miles, I spotted a small cabin set back from the road, half hidden among the trees. It looked abandoned, windows dark, the wooden steps cracked and weather-beaten. I pulled off the road, cutting the engine, and sat there for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the forest. I needed rest, just a few hours to clear my head and figure out my next move. I got out, moving cautiously, my ears straining for any sound. The air was cold, my breath visible in the dim light of dawn creeping over the treetops. I tried the door, and it creaked open with a groan. The inside was dark, but I could make out a few pieces of old furniture covered in dust and a couple of empty beer bottles scattered on the floor. It didn't look like anyone had been here for months. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, and took a deep breath. The place smelled musty, like damp wood and forgotten memories, but it was better than nothing. I found an old blanket draped over a chair and spread it out on the floor. I lay down, my body aching with exhaustion, and closed my eyes. I must have slept for a few hours, drifting in and out of dreams that twisted into nightmares. Flames, smoke, Sarah's face, William's screams. I woke with a start, my heart racing, a cold sweat on my forehead. I sat up, trying to steady my breath, my eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the cracks in the walls. That's when I heard it, a rustling outside, the crunch of leaves underfoot. I froze, my ears straining. I heard a soft voice, almost a whisper. Adam Mercer. My blood ran cold. Someone knew I was here. I got to my feet slowly, moving to the window, peering out. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, half hidden in the shadows. My hand instinctively went to the pocket where I kept my pocket knife. I gripped it tight, ready for whatever was coming. "Adam, I'm not here to hurt you," the voice said again. It was a woman's voice, soft but firm and strangely familiar. I hesitated, then called out, "Who are you? How do you know my name?" The figure stepped forward, and I could make out a face, young, sharp features, with dark hair pulled back. Recognition hit me like a slap. It was Emily, Sarah's younger sister. The last time I'd seen her was at a family gathering years ago, and we'd barely exchanged more than a few words. "Emily?" I whispered, stunned. "What the hell are you doing here?" She glanced around, her eyes scanning the trees, then hurried up the steps and pushed open the door. "I came to find you," she said, her voice urgent. "You're in danger, Adam. We don't have much time." I stared at her, my mind racing. "How did you find me? Why would you even—" "Sarah told me everything," she interrupted, stepping closer. "She's scared, Adam. She didn't know what to do. She thinks they're going to arrest you and she doesn't want that. She's terrified you'll do something stupid." I laughed bitterly. "Too late for that." She shook her head, a flash of anger in her eyes. "Look, I'm not here to argue. I'm here to help you, whether you like it or not." "Help me?" I scoffed. "Why would you help me? I'm the guy who burned down her lover's cabin." She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Because I know you're not a monster, Adam. I know you loved her, and I know she hurt you. But there's something you need to know. Something Sarah didn't tell you." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What are you talking about?" She took a deep breath. "William. He wasn't just her lover. He was blackmailing her." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What?" Emily nodded, her face tense. "He found out something about her, something from her past. He threatened to expose her, ruin her career, her life. She was trapped, Adam. She didn't know what to do." I felt my knees go weak. Why didn't she tell me? "She was ashamed," Emily replied softly. "She didn't want you to know. She didn't want you to think less of her. But it was eating her alive, Adam. That's why she started pulling away. That's why things got so messed up." I felt like I was drowning, my thoughts swirling in a vortex of confusion and disbelief. "So, what, you're saying she didn't love him?" Emily shook her head. "She was trying to keep you safe. She thought if she gave him what he wanted, he'd leave you alone. But it got out of hand, and then, well, you know the rest." I staggered back, the weight of her words crashing down on me. I had been so blind, so consumed by my own pain and anger that I hadn't seen what was right in front of me. "So, what now?" I asked, my voice hollow. Emily stepped closer, her gaze steady. "We need to get you out of here. Get you somewhere safe. I know someone who can help, someone who doesn't ask questions, but we need to move now, before the police find you." I nodded, my mind still reeling. I didn't know if I could trust her, didn't know if I could believe anything anymore. But I had no other options. "Okay," I whispered. "Let's go." She turned to lead the way, and I followed, my heart pounding in my chest. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was a way out of this, a way to fix the mess I had made. Or maybe I was walking into another trap. Emily led me through the woods, moving quickly and silently. She seemed to know the path well, ducking under low-hanging branches and stepping over roots without breaking stride. I followed close behind, my eyes darting around, nerves on edge. The forest was dense, the trees thick and close, and the early morning light was just beginning to filter through the canopy. Every step felt heavier than the last, like I was dragging the weight of my sins through the mud. I wanted to believe Emily, wanted to believe that Sarah had been trapped, that it wasn't as simple as an affair. But a voice in the back of my mind kept whispering, warning me not to trust her. What if she was lying? What if this was just another trick? We reached a clearing, and I saw a black SUV parked off a dirt road. Emily glanced back at me, her face tense, and motioned for me to hurry up. "Come on, we don't have much time." I hesitated for a moment, my feet rooted to the ground. "Emily, if you're lying to me—" She turned, her eyes hard. "I'm not lying, Adam. You don't have to trust me, but you don't have any other choice. We need to move." I took a deep breath, trying to quiet the doubts screaming in my head, and nodded. "Fine." We got into the SUV, and she started the engine, the vehicle roaring to life. She pulled onto the dirt road, driving fast, the tires kicking up dust. I glanced at her, trying to read her face, but she kept her eyes on the road, her jaw set. "Where are we going?" I asked. "To a friend's place," she replied. "Out of town, off the grid. You'll be safe there while we figure out what to do next." I nodded, though the knots in my stomach only tightened. I stared out the window as the trees flew by, the landscape blurring into a green and brown smear. I needed to think, to figure out if she was telling the truth. But I was too tired, too confused. Everything felt like a puzzle with missing pieces, and I didn't know where to start. We drove for what felt like hours, the road twisting and turning, the forest giving way to open fields, and then back to woods again. I kept glancing at Emily, looking for any sign that something was off. She seemed focused, determined, her hands steady on the wheel. But something in the back of my mind kept nagging at me, a feeling I couldn't shake. Finally, we turned onto a narrow, winding road that seemed to lead deeper into the wilderness. The trees grew thicker, their branches hanging low over the road, casting long shadows in the fading light. Emily slowed the car, her eyes scanning the surroundings, and then pulled to a stop near a small cabin, barely visible through the thick brush. "This is it," she said, turning off the engine. "Come on." I got out, my heart pounding in my chest, and followed her toward the cabin. The place looked old, abandoned, the wood darkened with age, the windows covered in grime. A single light flickered in the window, casting a dim glow on the overgrown path. Emily reached the door and knocked softly, glancing back at me. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something didn't feel right. A moment later, the door creaked open, and a man stepped out, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a thick beard and sharp eyes. He looked me up and down, his expression unreadable, then turned to Emily. "This him?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah, this is Adam." He stepped aside, gesturing for us to come in. "Get inside. We don't have much time." I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to turn around and run. But where would I go? I had no one, nowhere to hide. I took a deep breath and followed Emily inside, my hand still gripping the pocket knife in my jacket. The inside of the cabin was dimly lit, a single bulb hanging from the ceiling casting long shadows on the walls. There were maps and papers spread out on a wooden table, a laptop glowing in the corner. The man closed the door behind us, locking it with a loud click. "Sit down," he said, nodding toward a pair of chairs near the table. I glanced at Emily, who gave me a reassuring nod, and then sat down, my eyes never leaving the man. He walked over to the table, picking up one of the papers, and studied it for a moment, before looking at me. "So, you're the guy they're looking for," he said, his voice low and rough. "The guy who burned down a cabin and killed a man." I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. "He deserved it," I snapped. "You don't know what he did." The man raised an eyebrow, then glanced at Emily. "You sure about this?" he asked her. Emily nodded. "I'm sure. He's not a bad guy, he's just confused. He needs help." The man sighed, tossing the paper back on the table. "All right, here's the deal," he said, turning to me. "I can help you disappear, make sure they never find you, but it won't be easy, and it won't be cheap. I frowned, my suspicion growing. Why would you help me? He shrugged. Let's just say I've been where you are, and I know what it's like to feel trapped. But you're gonna have to trust me, and you're gonna have to do exactly what I say. I glanced at Emily again, trying to gauge her reaction. She seemed calm, collected, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of doubt or fear. I turned back to the man. And if I don't? He smiled, a slow, predatory grin. Then you're on your own, buddy. And trust me, the cops won't be the only ones looking for you. I felt a cold knot of fear tighten in my gut. I didn't know if I could trust this guy, didn't know if Emily was really on my side. But I had no other options, no other way out. All right, I said quietly. What do you need me to do? The man's grin widened. Good choice. Now let's get started. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into another trap, one I might not be able to escape. But I nodded, my heart pounding, knowing I had to play along, at least for now. Emily led me through the dense woods, moving quickly, her breath coming in short bursts. I kept close, my hand on the gun in my jacket, every sense alert. I could hear the sounds of our footsteps on the forest floor, the crack of twigs, the crunch of dried leaves, the hammering of my own heartbeat in my ears. I was running on adrenaline, my thoughts a jumble of fear and anger, my trust hanging by a thread. We reached the clearing where the black SUV was parked, hidden behind a thicket of trees. Emily motioned me to hurry. Come on, she whispered. We need to get out of here now. I hesitated, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Emily, who is this guy? Why should I trust him? She glanced back at me, eyes wide with urgency. He's a friend of mine. He knows how to make people disappear, but you have to trust me, Adam. I followed her reluctantly, my mind racing with doubts. The cabin door creaked open, and the man stepped out. He was tall, with a rough demeanor, his eyes like cold steel. He looked at me, and then at Emily. This is the guy, he grunted. Emily nodded. Yeah, he's the one. He waved us inside. I entered, my senses on high alert. The room was dimly lit, a single bulb swaying overhead, casting shadows that seemed to stretch and shrink. I could smell damp wood and something else, something metallic and sharp, like fear itself. The man spoke quickly. Listen, we don't have much time. Cops are closing in, and if they catch you, you're done. I can get you across the border, give you a new identity, but it's gonna cost you. I frowned. Why should I believe you? Why would you help me? He shrugged. Call it a favor for Emily. She owes me. I glanced at Emily. She was fidgeting, her eyes darting between the man and me, her face tight with worry. Emily, I whispered. What's really going on here? Before she could answer, the faint rumble of a car engine broke the silence. I saw a flicker of panic in the man's eyes. Shit, they're here, he muttered. He turned to Emily. Did you tell anyone? She shook her head vigorously, but I saw the hesitation, the flicker of guilt that crossed her face. I grabbed her arm, yanking her closer. Emily, did you set me up? Her face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't have a choice, Adam. They came to me, they threatened me. They said they'd pin everything on me if I didn't lead them to you. Rage boiled inside me. So you sold me out? You dragged me here just to hand me over? She sobbed. I'm sorry, Adam. I thought I could find a way out, but I got in too deep. The man cursed under his breath, pulling a gun from his waistband. Too late for apologies. We're getting out of here now. The sound of tires crunching on gravel grew louder. I moved to the window and saw the headlights cutting through the trees. It's over, I whispered, realizing the trap was closing in. I turned to the man. You're not getting me out, are you? His eyes narrowed. I was going to try, but your little friend here screwed it all up. I felt a jolt of betrayal and fear mix in my chest. I knew I couldn't trust him. Couldn't trust Emily. I took a step back, pulling the gun from my jacket. "Stay back," I warned. The man smirked. "What are you gonna do? Shoot your way out?" But before I could respond, the door burst open and 2 police officers stormed in, guns drawn. "Drop the weapon!" one of them shouted. I froze, my heart pounding. Emily shrieked, raising her hands in surrender. The man moved, too fast for me to react, grabbing my arm and twisting it. I fired the gun, the shot going wild, and the next thing I knew, I was on the ground, pain shooting through my shoulder where he'd slammed me down. The officers rushed in, tackling us both. I struggled, but it was no use. I was pinned, my face pressed against the dirty wooden floor, my vision blurring. As they cuffed me, I heard Emily's voice, frantic, pleading. "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." One of the officers pulled her aside. "You've got a lot to answer for," he said, his voice cold. But then I heard another sound, another car pulling up outside. I was shoved to my feet, the cuffs biting into my wrists, and I was marched outside. The night air was cold against my skin, and I blinked against the harsh light. And that's when I saw her. Sarah. She stepped out of the car, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. She looked at me, then at Emily, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. "Adam," she whispered, her voice breaking. My heart twisted in my chest. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" She didn't answer right away. Her hands were trembling. I came because I thought I could fix this. I thought I could make it right." I felt a wave of anger rise up. "Fix it? You brought them here, didn't you? You knew this was a trap." She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "No, I swear, I didn't. I just wanted to talk to you, to tell you that I'm pregnant." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. Pregnant? My mind reeled. I stared at her, at the fear and desperation in her eyes, and realized she wasn't lying. She took a step toward me, reaching out. "Adam, please. I was going to leave him. I was going to leave everything. I just needed time." I laughed bitterly. "Time? You think you've got time now?" Before I could say more, the man lunged at one of the officers, grabbing his gun. Shots rang out, deafening in the quiet forest. I saw Sarah's face twist in fear, saw Emily scream, and then felt a sharp, searing pain in my side. I collapsed to the ground, clutching my stomach, my vision going dark. I heard Sarah screaming my name, felt her hands on my face, but her voice seemed far away, distant, like an echo in a vast, empty space. I tried to hold on to her voice, tried to hold on to the world, but everything was slipping away, fading into darkness. And as the cold seeped into my bones, I realized that the last betrayal had come not from the ones I'd suspected, but from the one I'd loved the most, the one I'd never seen coming. And with that final, terrible realization, I let the darkness take me.